Okay, folks, so this is, if you, oh, hold on, let me refocus. There we go. This is the structure for paper number 3. So I'm going to go through this in this video. I'll also make some points on Sinead O'Connor and also on Alyssa Harad. I don't have the guitar for this one because I have to hold up my miniature whiteboard here. But let me talk a little bit about the structure first, and then I'll make some points on Harad and O'Connor. And I'll do another video still separately on them and their essays and on the paper topics as well. But here's the structure. And as I've been saying, not only in some of my comments here online, but also in my responses and comments on paper number 2, which you've gotten back, we're following the same structure in paper number 3 as we did in paper number 2. And I think I probably even mentioned that when we started the second paper, just so that you'd know how they connect together. So this format and structure that you used in paper number 2 is the same as this one. So I'll go through this in a second. I'll put this down here. But just to remind you, to take a look at the comments that I gave you on paper 2, because in those, I've told you what worked well in the first paper, and I've also gone through things that didn't quite work, or if you were deviating from the directions, or you didn't have parts that were needed for that paper. This is a good opportunity then to fix some of those issues with the third paper, because this structure that I've mentioned for these 2 essays is pretty standard. You're going to be able to use it for a lot of papers that you write pretty much in any class. It's a standard structure for most academic papers. I've said before that I still use it in some more scholarly articles that I write. It's just a good format to have in mind. It might seem overly proscriptive at times, where I'm telling you too much of where to put things, but I think since we're still in the first half of the class, I want you to have a sense of how to put these essays together, not just for me, but for your other classes. You'll have a sense of what kind of writing you may be doing in some of your other college classes. So with that said, let me remind you what that structure is, and then I'll give you some other pointers in terms of working on this paper before I mention something about those other 2 authors. So here you go. So for this paper, same as last time, in the introduction, I basically need to know 2 things. How you do this is really up to you. How much information you put in is also up to you, but there's 2 major ideas you gotta put in there. And that would be, what am I going to be reading about in this paper? Now, there's 4 separate topics for this. And so I can't give you a blanket idea of what every thesis would look like, because they're all going to be different depending on what topic you pick. So keep in mind that I'll need to know what it is you're writing about. So if that's topic number 1, that's on a favorite song or piece of music. If it's topic number 2, that's on a favorite scent. 3 is more on food, and then 4 is more on memory. It goes with the Sinead O'Connor piece and the way that piano in her grandmother's home was speaking to her. It was a sort of spiritual, almost mystical moment that she had as a kid, connected to music. So that's how she relates in to Glennie, but it also relates into some of the earlier stuff we read on family and some of the ideas on family memories that we had in paper number 2. I'll get to that more in a second, but that just gives you an idea of that. When I say you have to introduce the main idea of your paper, it's going to depend, or in your thesis will depend on which of the 4 topics you select. Okay, so if you have other questions on that, let me know, but I do need to know, again, if you're doing topic number 1 and you're writing on your favorite song, let's say it's I don't know, I'm wearing one of my Grateful Dead shirts today. I don't know if you can see it here, but maybe if I were writing about one of my favorite Grateful Dead songs, right, I would tell you in the first paragraph, I'm a huge fan of Birdsong by the Grateful Dead, written by Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter for their friend, Janis Joplin. And in this paper, I'll explain how my response to music is similar to the way that Glennie responds to music. So that's also part of your opening paragraph. Much like we did in paper number 2, I also need to know which of the authors you're going to be responding to and summarizing it and giving your opinion on. So again, if it's Glennie, you want to mention Glennie in your opening paragraph. For number 1, for 2 and 3, those topics are on Harad. So somewhere in the opening, she's got to be there, the way that Sontag was for paper number 2. And then lastly, if you do number 4, you'll need to mention Sinead O'Connor. Now, let me pause and mention why I do that. These sorts of papers, analytical papers, which are largely the kind of essays you'd have to write for a lot of your classes, they need to preview what's happening in the rest of the essay. So this is different than, for example, writing a short story, or let's say if we think back on the Mike Rose essay, that was more of a narrative, like the Toni Morrison. Sinead O'Connor's pieces are like that too. They're little stories. So those don't need a thesis at the beginning, because you're writing in order to capture the interest of the reader, and then to show them different things, to take them on a journey, through the story. Poems are similar depending on how you're writing them. These kinds of essays, though, you really want to put all your cards on the table, to use that cliche. So the opening paragraph can't get into a lot of detail on your topics, but you do need to identify to the reader what's going to happen in this paper. You'll notice in my comments, I call it a preview. So in other words, what's going to happen in this paper? What am I going to see when I'm reading it? Oh, I'm going to read about Evelyn Glennie. I want to know that in the first paragraph. I'm going to read about your favorite song or your favorite food or recipe. So if you can map out those ideas in the opening paragraph and give the reader some sense of what they're going to read as you go on, you're going to have a stronger paper. And I've tried to give you suggestions on that from paper number 2, particularly if I wasn't entirely clear on what you were going to be writing about. I've given you suggestions on maybe how to modify or edit that for this next paper, so that your opening is more specific maybe than it was if you struggled with that in paper number 2. So that's the introduction for this. Again, it's harder to break down individual topics or ideas for every one of these prompts because there's 4 of them. So you'll have to decide yourself how exactly you want to approach the thesis, but that is, again, dependent on what the prompt is that you're writing about. Okay, so let me go to the next part of the paper. Same thing as last time. Paragraphs 2 and 3 of this paper, maybe even paragraph 4, depending on how much you write, should be focused on the reading, the author that you focused on. Same as last time. Take a couple of quotations, quote them, and respond to them. So if you're doing topic number 1, Evelyn Glennie has her ideas on what music is, not just on what hearing is in that essay. And so what do you think of them? Do you agree? Do you disagree with her? What does she say? So that those first 2 body paragraphs after the introduction, you're engaging with either Glennie, or again, if it's topic number 2, it's Harrod and what she thinks about scent and how much smell means to her in her journey through life, how much food means to her if you're reading paragraph or paper number, or her other essay, Frozen Flowers. And then lastly, you've got Sinead O'Connor kind of talking about how music opened up the doors to her destiny for her, thanks to that piano that her grandmother had in her house. So those first two body paragraphs is you engaging with those readers. There's a great book called They Say, I Say, that was co-written by a professor up at Northwestern. And he says that that's what a lot of writing is, that it's, you're reading somebody else, you're seeing what they say, you're summarizing it in your papers, especially with research papers, and then you're giving your opinion. But you can really only give your opinion after you've established what the person is saying that you're writing about. So in other words, if I'm reading your paper on Sinead O'Connor, if I don't really know who she is, then I'm not going to really understand your analysis. And that's why we foreground that information in the first half of the paper, so that way a reader, assuming a reader may not know exactly what it is that you're writing about, and you sometimes have to work with that assumption because they may not know what your source material is or what you were reading to write your particular paper or research paper. You want to establish that research, which is what it is, in the first half of the paper. That establishes a really good foundation, a really good ground for the rest of the essay. And that gets to the second half. Much like last time, that's where your analysis is. If you're writing about a song, tell me about the song in the second half. What does it sound like? Why is it meaningful to you? Where did you first hear it? Why did it strike a chord with you? Again, it doesn't just have to be a song. It could be an instrumental piece of music, wordless piece of music. I've occasionally, as I said in the last video, had students that even wrote about favorite sounds. I mentioned the example of my student who was a mechanic and said how much comfort he took in just the noise actually of being at work because he enjoyed his job. So he didn't write about a song, but he said, he took that idea of sound and hearing and what it means to us as human beings also through Glennie to write about that. Again, and I've had people write about Alyssa Harrod, where they talk again about a favorite perfume or a favorite cologne or the smell of cookies that their grandmother made when they were kids and how much memories that brings back. So that would be 2 or 3. You'd be doing an analysis and a discussion of that favorite scent. Again, favorite smell of a favorite food, especially if you're doing topic number 3, which is more about an actual discussion of your favorite food or favorite recipe that you have. And then, as I said, the Sinead O'Connor topic still is related to what we talked about with Sontag, what we talked about with Mike Rose. It's both the limitations that were placed on her by her family, because she touches on this in the pieces that I gave you. Her mother was abusive, had issues that she took out on her children. And so Sinead O'Connor and her brothers and sisters often look to their father and their grandparents for comfort and for solace because the abusiveness of her mother was really more than more than she or any child should be asked to handle. And so she found her escape from that, and she found her destiny through music. And you see that in that first of the short essays that I gave you of hers, where she's near that piano in her grandmother's living room somewhere in Dublin, and it's speaking to her. And that becomes this kind of mystical moment where she realizes, I need to be a musician. That's how I'm going to find my place in the world. And you see that in the other shorter essays I gave you. It's her finding that destiny. And that's what that fourth topic is really about. Have you had a moment like that, particularly a moment with a family member where there was something about the interaction or something that they either gave you or said to you that put you on the path that you're on now, whether that be for your studies or for, the interest that you have. So again, that's the fourth topic. So they're all slightly different, but same structure. Again, introduction, tell me what you're writing about, have your thesis there. First half of the body is that response and summary and discussion of the writer that you read. Second half of the paper is the analysis of the main topic of the paper, whatever it is that you've selected to write about. That can also obviously relate back to some of the ideas from the writer that you're discussing, and then your conclusion. So you'll notice on the list here that this should be at least a 6-paragraph paper. It can be a little longer than that. That's something to keep in mind, because you might go a little longer than 6 paragraphs. It probably shouldn't be any shorter than that, though, because you need the intro, you need those 4 body paragraphs at minimum, and then the conclusion. And so before I mention any other brief details on Herod and O'Connor, which I've kind of already mentioned as I talked about this, here's some other pointers, because now that we're already on the third paper for the class, I've had a lot of good questions and feedback from all of you on, how to improve your writing, or, how to keep it strong as you go into these assignments here as we get to the middle of the class. And here's some suggestions, some general suggestions that I hope also will help you with other classes. First of all, as I always mention, read over those directions. I know that sounds simplistic, but when I say read over the directions, also make sure to, watch any of these videos that are related to the different parts of the directions, so that way you have some clarity on what it is that I'm asking you to do, because the directions go hand in hand with these videos. So if you've gotten into the habit maybe of only reading the directions and not watching the videos, do both, because that's part of the online, class experience, classroom experience, virtual classroom experience. Next thing, please ask me questions. The earlier you get in touch with me, especially if you want me to read a draft, the better I can help you, the more I can help you. So when you see that a paper is due in 2 weeks, one thing I could recommend is don't think of it as, okay, this paper is due on whatever, October, whatever the day is, on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever the day. And, okay, if that's the due date, I'll just start it the day before, or I'll start it the day of. I'll ask Kremen some questions about it the day before, and we'll be all set. I will still try to help you if you contact me the day before paper is due, but chances are I'm not only going to be grading papers for another couple of classes, but I'm also going to have a lot of other people from a class that are going to be asking me the same question. So the earlier you get me a draft, the better, to be honest. My comments are probably going to be, because I'm going to have more time to look at it, and the more time you're going to have to revise it. So if you have the tendency to procrastinate, sometimes we can't avoid it because of work obligations, because of family obligations. But anytime you can start one of these assignments early, so that you have time to think about them, so you don't have to rush them, so you can really enjoy the writing experience, start them early, ask me questions. That's why I give you these quizzes where I say, oh, what topic are you working on? So that way, a week before the paper's due, you have some planning and you have some thought going into it. Because if you're leaving these, especially these papers that we're doing as we get more here towards the middle of the semester, if you leave them to the day before, if you leave them even until 2 days before, they're more challenging. There's more moving parts, as I said, with paper number 2. So try to start them earlier, because again, the more you ask me for help, maybe you want to make an appointment with the writing center, the better your papers are going to be. So I know that that's not an easy solution. There's no magic to writing. As I say to a lot of my students, it takes time. It takes time. It takes patience. And sometimes it's hard to find that time in our schedules, but if you can, even if you do a little bit every day when I assign a paper, I've said in the past, if you read the assignments the first week, you get them, and then the second week you're drafting, well, you'll have plenty of time to work on the essays. So that's another suggestion I have for you. When you see that deadline, don't think to yourself, oh, I'll just do that the day before, because that's when you're going to have other assignments from other classes. And that's why I always give you 2 weeks to do these assignments, so that you have the time and you're not rushing to do them. Because as I've said in other videos, I'm a slow writer, so I'm not one that can give you suggestions on how to write a paper very quickly the day before, because I've never done that, not only as a student but as a professional writer. And I'm happy to help. And those of you that have sent me drafts know that I try to give you as much information as I can. So the earlier you can get me a draft, or meet with me over Zoom, the better most likely your work is going to be, because I'll be able to help you and give you suggestions. So there's just a couple of pointers to kind of keep in mind. Last thing I'll mention before I say two last things about Harad and the O'Connor essays, is also read my comments on the previous papers. You've now done 2 of them. So all of those papers have comments on them with suggestions on how to restructure things and suggestions on how to improve sentence fragments if you have them, and how to improve your conclusions and how to add more detail to a paper. Because again, these papers are 3 pages long. So I want you to get to the end of the 3rd page for them. And so if you get stuck, or if you've gotten stuck in the previous essays, I've tried to give you suggestions on how to expand on your ideas. So all those comments and reading those comments is part of the writing process for the class. So you can see how you did. Hopefully my suggestions will be helpful. If you're not sure of something that I've suggested, or you want other additional suggestions, just meet with me. Like I said, we could talk over Zoom. Send me an email if Zoom, if you're too busy to meet, and I'll be happy to email you back and answer your questions in detail. And again, those of you that have done that with me know that I'm very quick in responding to emails. And I get the papers back quick too. Like I said, once I have one set of papers, I got to finish them so I can move on to the next set for my other classes. And as I said, I enjoy the editing process. So hopefully my comments are useful to you. All right. So with that out of the way, like I said, I'm going to devote another video specifically to ideas in Harad and O'Connor. But I want to mention again, the reason that they're there is that these 3 writers are all talking about our senses. We have Glennie talking about our sense of hearing, and also about what music means to us as human beings, how much sound is part of our lives. And she's stressing that even, as a deaf person, she is still working with sound. That's her profession. She's a musician. And so she's trying to expand that idea of what hearing is, what deafness is, and what people who are deaf or hard of hearing are capable of. So it's part of what she's doing in her writing. I think Sinead O'Connor is very similar, again, as someone who is a little younger. She's closer to my age, I think, than to Evelyn Glennie. But this is someone who went through a rough time in her childhood because of the abuse at home that she experienced through her mom, but found a way to make sense of that experience and also to share that experience. That's one thing that I really admired about this book when I was reading it this summer. I'd always been a fan of her music, but I was really impressed by how candid she is about writing about not only how she handled that abuse as best as she could, but also how she's taken it and tried to help others by writing about it, by writing songs about it, by trying to share her experiences. She's a very, very spiritual person as well. She was raised Catholic, has converted to Islam. And so she has a lot in her writing, not so much in the pieces that I gave you, because I was focusing more on her music and how she found her destiny and her sense of purpose through music. But she has this religious and mystical sensibility that's also really central to her. So she might be someone that you might want to look at from that perspective, because when she talks about finding that destiny because the piano is speaking to her, that's a mystical experience that she has that kind of puts her on the path that she takes throughout the rest of her life. And I'll post a couple of her songs this week also, so you can hear them. They're wonderful, and she's got a really amazing, powerful voice. And then Harad is writing about these adventures that she has and how her love of perfume, her love of scent takes her on these different adventures, her love of food. And so those are essays, the 2 that I gave you from her, about finding joy and finding meaning and experience through those kinds of pleasures, I guess you could call them, the pleasures of scent, the pleasures of food, and trying to find some kind of meaning and purpose in life through those elements of the things that she enjoys, especially the perfume and perfume diet and the food in the other essay. So again, these build on some of the themes that we had in the first 2 papers, but they're expanding beyond them as well. So keep that in mind as well as you're writing about this. I hope you enjoyed the essays. There's a lot more to choose from in terms of your topics. So as much as I want you to follow this format so that I'm confident that you'll be able to do this in other classes as well, you've got more freedom with this essay, because there's just more topics and there's more to write about. And there's a way even that you can incorporate some narrative ideas that you might have, if you're writing about your favorite food or recipe or song. with some of the more analytical things that we did in the Sontag essay. So I also, one last thing I'll mention, as I think of paper number 3, since we're going to get into the midterm after this one, as being kind of a summary of those first 2 papers, the narrative elements of the first paper, and then the more analytical elements with the sources and the MLA formatting of the second one. So these kind of this particular set of topics kind of brings together for, I think, the first half of the class. All right, so just some general pointers on that. I'll be back in another video, next video, where we'll talk a little bit more about O'Connor and Herod and how they relate to Glennie. And again, as I said, please email me if you have any questions, send me drafts if you'd like me to take a look at them, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk to you then. Bye.